to this panel on the state of land use and conservation. We have three great panelists who are going to bring different perspectives, and I think it's going to be fascinating. This panel will be moderated by Caroline Cox, our program director for the last 3 years, who sadly for us, but great for her, has accepted a position as an assistant professor at Boston College Law School. So I'll turn it over to you, Caroline. Thank you.
Great, thank you everyone. I am so excited for this panel. We have three great panelists. I also just want to say thank you to everyone who has stuck around today. Your questions and enthusiasm is what makes this conference so great. So I will do my best to make sure we have enough time for some audience questions. This is the state of land use and conservation. This is more than just zoning codes and new construction, though I'm sure we'll talk some about that. But how, where, and what we build has a lasting impact on environmental concerns. And both the public and private sectors have a role to play, which is why we have such a great panel to discuss this issue. We have Harriett Brooks, who's the planning manager and manager of the ecological design team for the Metro Nashville Planning Department. Mike Matteson, who's the community development director for Williamson County. And finally, Bruz Clark, CEO of the Lyndhurst Foundation. So without further ado, I'm gonna not talk much during this time and I'll hand things over to Harriett.
Great, thank you, Caroline. Can everyone hear me? Okay. It's great to see so many friendly faces in the audience. My name is Harriett Brooks, and as Caroline noted, I lead the ecological design team at Metro Planning. And I'm here today. I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about where Nashville is in kind of the lifespan of the city. I like to say that we're in our awkward adolescent phase. The kind of, middle school awkward years. And by that, I mean for the last decade or so, the city has been growing really fast. We've had lots of new jobs, we have new population growth. However, we've yet to catch up on some of the aspects that are really necessary to making a city work. Transportation, infrastructure, zoning reform, housing, and conservation. And this leads to three major growing pains or tensions that Nashville is currently experiencing in terms of its land use and kind of tensions that we're trying to work through within the planning department. So the first of those I would say is the true need for housing affordability, housing diversity, housing attainability, you name it, versus infrastructure and zoning capacity. The second is land development and urbanization versus conservation of the environment and place character. And then the third, which is kind of the trickiest, is the tourism economy versus residents' quality of life. And so this is the Growth and Conservation Concept Map from Nashville Next. Nashville Next was adopted in 2015, so we're 10 years out, which is a good time to kind of look back and reflect. You can see in the conservation map a very kind of tidy idea of where growth should happen in the center and along the corridors. And then we have a nice swath of green space along the western edge where the Highland Rim is, which is our most kind of ecologically intact forest. So it makes a lot of sense. However, I will say that as we've developed, we've developed a little differently than what Nashville Next projected. And so jobs more than projected, so that's good. Population about a little more than projected, not a whole lot, but a little more. So that's also, good. But you'll see there's a big differential between households that were projected, which is the gray line, and the number of households that we need. And there's several reasons for that. People are living longer, people are living independently, people are getting married later. Our household composition is different, and so that affects land use. That affects how we need to be building and developing. And that leads us to the first tension I want to talk about, which is housing demand versus infrastructure and zoning capacity. So, and I'll try to go through this quickly. So how much housing do we need? Nashville Next projected that we need about 24,000 units within a 10-year period to stay on track. We've produced more than that, so that looks good. However, Nashville Next didn't take into account the kind of spike in population growth, and so our unified housing study has shown that we actually need more than we're currently producing, which is that green line. And then if you also take into account the new the economic development that's been coming in, some new corporations that don't necessarily show up in the population trend data, you see that we actually need even more than that. And so then that really starts to show where our supply is lacking. You can see here our estimated supply is somewhere a little over 60,000 within a 10-year period, and there's a pretty large gap with what we need. So our team started last year a housing and infrastructure study that's taking a look at this. Our long-range planning team has kicked this off with the consultant team. You may have seen an article in the Nashville Scene yesterday about the project and the community engagement that's going on. If you did happen to see that article, you will have read, that there's some real tensions and tough conversations that are happening about how we're growing and the impacts that it's having on communities and on really place identity. The housing and infrastructure study is tackling some pretty tough questions. What stands in the way of building housing that works for all Nashvillians? And spoiler alert, I'll say that zoning is a part of it, but not all of it. Where should we be adding housing to meet Nashvillians' vision for the future? And then what sorts of infrastructure and amenities are needed to support that level of growth? And to get there, our research team and long-range planning team, are doing all sorts of analysis, from very kind of high-scale system analysis, looking at infrastructure. There's some really sexy things like sewer and curb and gutter that go into how we can plan and build for neighborhoods that are sustainable. And then we also have to look, in the small scale at particular neighborhoods like Laughlin Springs, which is in East Nashville, close to where I live. It's right next to Gallatin Pike, which is a major planned to be a major transit corridor in the Choose How You Move plan. But it's also a historic neighborhood, and so there are limitations on how much additional density or middle housing we can grow. So trying to find some balance and new ideas there is important. Okay, I'm going to speed up. Okay. Attention to enabling development and prioritizing conservation. I'm sure you've all heard people in Nashville say Nashville's growing too fast. And I feel like a lot of that is due to a feeling that we're losing sort of our place identity, our sense of place, or character. And there's a feeling that the suburban areas of the county are seeing the most change. We're a metro county, we have very urban, and we go very rural. And we haven't done a great job at setting design standards for how we design on hilltops and ridge lines, steep slopes, how we make sure we're ensuring view sheds and taking care of our stream buffers and wetlands and things of that nature. And so I think that becomes very visible in the suburban areas. We did have a tree canopy assessment that came out last year, and it was really interesting in that it showed that there was actually a growth in tree canopy in the very rural and very urban parts of the county, because we've really focused on tree canopy downtown, but there's been a loss in the suburban areas. And so we need to be kind of focusing more on that transition. And one part of the county that is a case study we're currently looking at is the Cambridge, Antioch area. And it's interesting in that I-24 in the southeast part of the county runs straight through the middle of the study area. It's the fastest growing part of the county. It's the most diverse, it's the youngest, there's a lot of growth, but it's traditionally farmland. And there are a lot of steep slopes and sensitive environmental features, including cedar glades. And so there's a real tension here in this part of the county. As an example, also in other parts where, we're seeing some real tension about how we can grow to accommodate the housing and diversity that's needed, but not lose that character that's so critical. So our team is embarking this year on a conservation ecology strategy. We are currently in contract negotiations with the leading national environmental engineering and design firm that will be tasked with helping us understand our current ecological conditions, project future conservation priorities, create a conservation strategy and toolkit, and then recommend next steps to enhance environmental equity and resiliency. We expect that this study will take at least 18 months. It will have very dynamic community engagement as a part of it. And, as they say often with trees, the best time to plant one was 20 years ago, which is when we should have done this strategy, but we're starting now. So I'd love to see everyone in here engaged with that effort. And I'll fly through this last one, but it's really just trying to grapple with the impact of the tourism economy versus resident quality of life. I think if any of y'all live in Davidson County, you know that there can be a real tension between Nashvillians feeling like we are not growing for Nashvillians, but that we're often growing for the tourists that drive our economy. It is a very significant driver of local state revenue and employment, and we can't, kind of turn away from that. But at the same time, especially as metro government, we have a responsibility really to our citizens. This is a project that I've spent the past 2 years working on. Very, kind of small part of the county, but where Cheekwood and Percy Warner Park kind of come together with the Bellamy Highlands neighborhood, and just the traffic and demand that is generated from those two tourist attractions has had such a significant impact on both the park and the neighborhood. That is, it's the sort of thing where we really have to there are no easy solutions, and we need to work on coming up with strategies that can both kind of help the transportation, improve transportation infrastructure without sacrificing our really, really significant kind of cultural landscapes that we have. And so I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harriet. And I, now for a great comparator, will turn to Mike to talk about our neighbor to the south, Williamson County.
Okay, thank you, Harriet. Great job. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Mike Matteson. I'm the Community Development Director. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Mike Matteson. I'm the Community Development Director for Williamson County. For us, community development consists of 5 different sub-departments, planning department, engineering, building codes, etc., all having something to do with managing growth and development. So I'm going to talk to you about Williamson County from a policy standpoint. There are actually multiple individual policies that we have related to land use, but I'm going to focus on kind of the one overarching policy that we have that is intended to help preserve rural character in our county, despite the fact that we have always been, historically, one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing counties in the state. Our aim is to preserve that character that citizens value so much in the face of pretty enormous growth pressures that we experience, just like the region is experiencing. So quickly to give you a lay of the land, this is a map of Williamson County. There are actually 6 different cities within Williamson County. Brentwood is shown in the dark green, Franklin in the purple, Thompson Station in the tan shade, Spring Hill in blue, and incidentally Spring Hill is one of those rare cities that straddles the border between Williamson County and Spring Hill. You see Nolensville in the north east corner in the yellow shade, and then finally Fairview in the northwest corner. you'll notice that there are two different shades associated with each of the cities. The darker shade represents the city limits as they stand today. The lighter shade surrounding that is representative of the urban growth boundaries. And some of you have probably heard of that term, but each city has identified an urban growth boundary outside of their corporate limits. Essentially, these are areas that the cities have said we intend to grow into those areas at some point as infrastructure becomes available and as growth continues to occur. And then the white areas and those few smaller areas of kind of that coral color are the unincorporated areas of Williamson County outside of those urban growth boundaries. So my office's jurisdiction are the urban growth boundaries, at least temporarily until they're part of the city, and those more rural areas. It's interesting because most people, when they think of Williamson County, they think of Franklin and Brentwood, and they think of the high growth and all the development that's been occurring, and they're right to think that way. I mean, Williamson County has been growing so rapidly. There are enormous growth pressures, but there are, a lot of undeveloped properties. In fact, about 50% of Williamson County is currently undeveloped, and we're hoping to continue that trend or preserve that. These are images that I think represent the character that we have in Williamson County, and these are pretty illustrative of those areas in white. We feel like we're pretty fortunate in Williamson County to have these rural areas. Our citizens place a high value on them. It's pretty, I think, unique when we can be in a downtown environment like Franklin with the historic downtown that is vibrant and bustling and very urban. And then in about 5 minutes, if you head west, you're in the area represented in that picture on the left. And that's pretty interesting and unique juxtaposition that we're working hard to try to preserve. Okay, so I was here in 2007 when the county updated its comprehensive land use plan. And as we always do, we had multiple meetings and different opportunities to involve citizens. There was a lot of engagement. And the predominant theme from all of the public feedback was to preserve rural character and focus the lion's share of growth in certain key areas, namely those urban growth boundaries. And everyone could pretty much buy into that as a policy. But when the rubber hit the road and we talked about changing allowable residential densities to help implement that policy, at that point, back in 2007, it just wasn't politically palatable to change that. And that, that's understandable. It's a property rights state and area. And so the zoning densities did not change. And so there's been this disconnect between the policy and what it allowed from the development standpoint. And this next map shows kind of the repercussions of that decision. To orient you, the dark gray represents the municipal boundaries, the city limits of those 6 cities. The yellow represents the urban growth boundaries that I talked about previously. The red represents development that was already in place in 2007 when we did the comp plan. And then those blue and purple shades represent development that occurred since then. And so you can see that if the system was working like we hope it would, most of that development would take place in the yellow areas, in those urban growth boundaries. But instead what we saw was kind of a leapfrogging of development over those boundaries into those rural areas. And that resulted in kind of this chipping away of rural character. It resulted in some strain from the standpoint of providing services. And it also kind of exacerbated an increasing traffic problem. So those were all things that we were concerned about when we were embarking on another update to our comprehensive plan. And we were particularly concerned in light of the growth projections that were out there at the time. This is one of them that suggested that the population of Williamson County would essentially double by the year 2045. And so that was the context and the climate that we were in when we were going through our most recent comprehensive plan update. And we felt like that this was kind of a pivotal moment, that we were in this fork of the road from a policy standpoint where we kind of needed to decide once and for all, do we really want to preserve rural character and focus the growth strategically, or were we willing to kind of concede and conclude that the continuation of that suburban sprawling pattern was okay. So we, working with a consultant, we asked them to develop a couple of different models. One called business as usual, in other words, what would happen if the county built out according to the policies that were in place at the time, which were essentially a 1 unit per acre zoning in most of the county. Or the second model, which we refer to as town and country, what would happen if we actually reduced the allowable density in those rural areas to 1 unit per 5 acres instead of 1 unit per acre. And then we asked them to evaluate each of those scenarios based on community character or how well did it align with what the citizens were wanting to see, traffic and road improvement needs and the cost of those, and then finally overall fiscal impacts. We hired a fiscal consultant that evaluated these different models from a fiscal standpoint. And that turned out to be pretty key in this whole thing. So just real quickly, I don't want to spend too much time, I want to leave time for questions, but this illustrates that first scenario, that business as usual scenario. You can see some of the numbers, including around 82,000 additional dwelling units outside of the UGBs would take place with urban growth boundaries. An increase significantly in automobile traffic and cost to provide needed road improvements. And then one thing that resonated real loudly with our county commission and decision makers was it showed that there would be about a $5 billion cost to serve associated with that model over a 20-year period. Versus the second model, the town and country, you can see that most of those numbers are essentially cut in half. That big number of the dollars and cents, we were able to show that the second scenario would shave about $3.5 billion from a cost to serve standpoint over those 20 years, which, kind of directly affects taxpayers. And so that really did resonate with our decision makers. So we trotted out both of these scenarios. There was about a 92% favorability among the public for that second model. We were working with an advisory committee who pretty much unanimously decided to pursue that model. And then importantly, the county commission and the planning commission, who were the decision makers, decided to pursue that. And that plan was adopted with those policies in place, followed pretty shortly by actually changing the zoning in those rural areas, which wasn't easy. That was a tough lift, and there was some opposition. But when it got to the county commission meeting, there was about, I think the vote was 22-1 or something like that night. So it turned out to be, I think, a very good decision that will pay dividends for us for many years. And that's all I have. I'll turn it over to Bruz. Bruz.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Bruz Clark. I realize looking at the program that I'm the only philanthropist amongst the group of panelists. I'm the only non-Nashvilleian, and I have the strangest name. Fortunately, I'm a banjo picker, so I'm used to being the oddball in the group. What I want to talk to you about today is a place-based approach to land use and conservation. And Carolyn has asked me to talk a little bit about how philanthropy can affect the built environment and also the conservation of our natural treasures. Briefly about Lyndhurst and me, you can, I guess you'll distribute these PowerPoints, and you can find most of this on the internet. But just a brief word about Lyndhurst. We were established in 1938 by a man named T. Carter Lupton. Chattanooga is the home of the container of Coca-Cola, and Atlanta is the home of the beverage. A lot of people don't realize, but both of those enterprises made many families enormously wealthy, and we're the beneficiary of that. Some general information, the 2 points I want to stress for y'all today is that we take the long view, and you have to take the long view when you're doing this kind of work. And we also work diligently to establish strategic partnerships and relationships. And many of you in the room are among those relationships that we cultivated over the years. When I use the pronoun we, I don't mean necessarily just the Lyndhurst Foundation. I mean the collective we, because it takes all of us to do this kind of work. Our 4 programmatic priority areas are listed on the screen. The 2 that are most germane to today's conversation are conservation, parks and outdoor recreation, and urban design and development. Our funding runs the gamut from arts, architecture, archaeology, and aquaria to historic preservation, housing, health, parks, placemaking, trails, transit, and zoos. So we cover a lot of bases. Our geographic footprint includes 3 states, 16 counties, and 76 towns. So a pretty big area. That equates to about 6,600 square miles or 4.2 million acres. And if you were to draw a radius around the bullseye, which is Chattanooga, that would be about a 100-mile radius. And we take great pride in knowing what our communities are, who the people are, and visiting them frequently. So we are truly place-based. If you boil the essence of our mission down into 3 phrases, it would be quality of life, quality of place and built environment, and quality and health of our natural ecosystems. Our former director used to say that great places don't happen by accident, and that we get the kind of places that we deserve. And I really took that to heart when he said that. We have choices, and this meeting is about making choices, but we don't always make the best ones. We have worked very hard in our community to understand the molecular structure of the built environment, and we've come down to 4 basic elements which are listed again on the screen. But the trick is how you assemble these elements to get places that are beautiful, that are durable, that are desirable, and that are sustainable. We embrace a number of different principles related to sustainable community. And there are 9 of them that we use, not only to help us determine what our interventions might be, but also to evaluate if we're making any difference. And you can read through the list. I'll pull out a couple: a rich public realm, diverse modes of transportation, a community that respects the natural ecology. And you might say those are all well and good and kind of a pipe dream to create places that incorporate a few of those, let alone all of them. And I would say, you're wrong. You can actually create these kinds of places, and examples of them exist all over the world and in our own region. This is a picture I took in Stockholm, and if you compare the picture to the principles, you'll see that all of them are embedded in it. And wouldn't you like to live in one of those apartments with the bay window overlooking this plaza? This is Chattanooga in the 1890s. How ironic. If you were to colorize the slide and change the people's dress, you would have exactly the same thing. So we laugh in the office a lot about how we spend a lot of our time, energy, and resources on recreating what we already had, and also trying to refrain from repeating the mistakes that led to our demise. These 2 slides show a lot. The ground zero of our community would be in the center of this slide, and this was taken in around 1940. We had a rich urban environment with mixed use, public buildings, all the things that anyone would want. And what is not shown is on both the left and right side were robust neighborhoods with mixed use housing. This is what is left today. And there are lots of reasons for this. I feel like that our onset of architectural design and planning amnesia began around the end of World War II. When our society wanted something different, we wanted to be more modern, and we scrapped some of the principles that were sacrosanct when it comes to how you build great places. This is sad to me. In terms of trying to recover, we're big proponents of the SMART code, the SMART growth manual, new urbanism, and the form-based code. The form-based code prescribes a physical outcome, and it can be used from a landscape basis to an individual building. And those of you who are planners and designers are probably pretty familiar with this, but if you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend that you study it. And what's fascinating is it's based on what is called a transect, which is an ecological concept that was developed by the polymath Van Humboldt in the 1700s. But the application of an ecological concept to an urban design concept is fascinating. Some of the things we've worked on, and I wanted to just comment on some of the words I heard today. We've been involved in net zero housing. We established the first bike share program in the Southeast. We have a river walk that extends for 15 miles. We've been trying to revitalize our urban core neighborhoods that were destroyed. We have a great design center similar to the Civic Design Center here in Nashville. And somebody talked about energy burdens. We are working hard to weatherize and solarize housing, particularly in our distressed neighborhoods. One thing we've really been working hard on is missing middle housing. This level of housing was decimated through programs like urban renewal and more modern zoning codes, which are actually suburban. This kind of construction was illegal when we started to try to recreate it. Last year, we were the recipient of the Jack Kemp Excellence Award in Affordable and Workforce Housing. We have about 200 units of mixed middle housing in place and hope to have another 100 or so in the next 12 to 18 months. This is a picture of our riverfront in 1989. The river would be in the foreground of the picture, and what you see is a bleak, it's really pretty depressing. Bleak, blighted, broken, and dying downtown. And I've lived in Chattanooga all my life, and I remember distinctly what it was like. But my point in the next slide is that you can do something about it. It takes a long time, it takes energy and resources. But this is our riverfront today, and we have more good things in the works. On a regional level, we work with the Thrive Regional Partnership, which is an offshoot of our Chattanooga Chamber of Commerce, and their mission is to inspire responsible growth. One of their tools, if you're into transportation and movement of freight and goods, they have just piloted a new program called TRIP, and it's a way to analyze the flow of traffic and freight. Chattanooga is in what is called Freight Alley. We're the 11th most bottlenecked community in the United States when it comes to traffic. So take a peek at this if you're interested. We also work with the Carl Vinson Institute of Government. They have a mobile design and planning SWAT team that we have been able to deploy to Northwest Georgia and some of the communities in Southeast Tennessee. And they assist communities in understanding their assets, developing master plans, and really charting a path forward that is better than what they probably would pursue if they didn't have help. I'll switch to the quality of health and natural ecosystems, and this is my favorite part of my job because my background is in the natural sciences and I love biology and ecology. As an ecologist and a biologist, I'm lucky to live where I do because this is an amazing place if you're interested in natural things. We live where the Cumberland Plateau, the Ridge and Valley, and the Southern Blue Ridge converge, and these are places, whenever you have edges of different ecosystems or physiographic provinces, you always get the best critters. But the problem is this. We are a high priority area in terms of conservation, but all the resources and public protected land is in the West. And if we did not have our limited series of national forests, we would have virtually nothing in terms of an ecological backbone. So there's a tremendous mismatch that we have to remedy and to work on. It has already been mentioned, but we are the epicenter of freshwater aquatic diversity. We have species that exist nowhere else on the planet, and I read the other day that we have more freshwater species in the entire continent of South America. Pretty remarkable. And when there was debate about whether or not to build an aquarium that featured freshwater species, people didn't understand the richness that we had, and I think it was a brilliant move. We live in the veritable Garden of Eden. Unfortunately, the tapestry that is our natural world is fraying and in many places unraveling, and it is imperative that we do something about this. Looking at tools and resources again, we have a lot of resources that are available. We have one of the best state wildlife action plans in the country. We have a robust network of land trust. We have a lot of things to work on, but the challenge is achieving scale in a reasonable period of time because we're losing ground. A couple conservation projects that we funded that I thought you would be interested in. One is the protection of the 25,000 acre viewshed of the Tennessee River Gorge Trust, which is only about 4 miles from downtown Chattanooga. It's the 4th largest river canyon in the east. In 2003, we gave quite a bit of money to the Nature Conservancy to protect what is called the Walls of Jericho. I don't know if you've ever been there, but if you haven't, you should go there. It features incredible aquatic features. It has a limestone amphitheater. It's just amazing at approximately 21,000 acres that spans the Tennessee and Alabama border. It's also one of the headwaters of the Paint Rock River, which has over 100 species of fish and 45 species of mollusks. One of my favorite projects is the completion of the Cumberland Trail, and this is one of Governor Lee's priorities. The Cumberland Trail is more than a footpath. It happens to embody what we call the 6 C's. These are criteria we look at to evaluate whether or not we want to get involved in a conservation project. But if you've ever studied Benton MacKay, does anybody know who he was? Yeah, he was the founder of the Appalachian Trail. Benton MacKay was an outdoors person, but he was also a forester, a geographer, and a regional planner. And his idea was to build these linear parks that served as buffers to what he called the deluge of the metropolitan invasion. And what he was prescient in that he understood that we were getting ready to experience sprawl. And he was right. People want to do something, but they feel helpless and paralyzed. In fact, I had a cup of coffee at Starbucks today, and the attendant asked me what I was doing, and I said I was speaking at an environmental conference. She said, God, we need more of that. She was probably 19 years old. About 18 months ago, I discovered Doug Talamay and his work. If you haven't read Nature's Best Hope, again, I encourage you to do so. He is on a crusade to recruit homeowners and landowners at multiple scales to not only conserve, but to restore native plant populations in an effort to bolster biodiversity. Learning about Doug, we decided as a region that we would like to try to recruit him, and we have. He runs an organization called Homegrown National Park, and they have partnered with Thrive and 8 other steering committee groups, of which I'm a member, to create a new project called Thriving Gardens. And this project consists of a native plant guide, which I have brought for every one of you. I think I can accommodate you. And also a companion website. And it's really to teach us what plants are the best to use in the environment that we live in. Our Rosetta Stone is the cradle of Southern Appalachian Conservation Plan. This is a product of the Thrive Natural Treasures Task Force, again, which I'm a member of. This was produced about 2 years ago, and our audacious goal is to protect 30% of our landscape by 2050. This predates 20 by 30, which many of you are familiar with. And if we accomplished it, we would have to double the amount of protected land that we have to almost 1 million acres. I will be 90 in 2050. If we accomplish this, I will feel like my life's work has been done, and I will retire after that. I'll leave you with a quote from Barry Lopez. Again, you all probably know Barry's work. He says, "We cannot, of course, save the world because we do not have authority over its parts. We can serve the world, though." That is everyone's calling to lead a life that helps. It is a great privilege for me and inspiration to be in a room full of people who share a calling to leave a better built and natural environment, better than the one we inherited. So thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
So we have about 10 minutes for questions. Keep them short so we can get to as many as possible. We'll start over here.
I'll direct this to Ms. Brooks. Nashville's Parks and Greenways Master Plan, finalized in 2016, recommended the acquisition of 4,500 acres of parkland by 2027. 2027 is pretty close, and the city has acquired almost no additional land during that time, so we fall far short of our goal. The Urban Forestry and Landscape Master Plan extols the virtues of healthy forests. So my question is, why isn't the city buying and conserving forested land now instead of 2 years from now or a year and a half from now?
Yes, that is a great question. I think, there are a couple of things. The short answer is that we have not had a plan of what is the right land to buy. And so there are a lot of groups out there. I see lots of friends from the Highland Rim Forest Alliance who have been advocating for us to look at the Highland Rim Forest, and that was truly one of the reasons that we're starting the conservation ecology study this year. And one of the goals for that study is to provide us with a framework of understanding, as a metro government, what is a good investment in terms of land that we should be buying, that's looking at both kind of where it is and how it's situated kind of ecologically, environmentally, but then also how it can serve the parks and greenways system, and also making sure that we're making equitable investments. And so we're not just looking at the western part of the county, which also happens to be a very affluent part of the county, but that we're kind of have a lens of kind of equitably considering all of the places where we should be purchasing land. I will say also, just as a note, the Parks Department right now is working on an update to Plan to Play. And so, hopefully with that update, we'll also have some kind of further guidance in terms of park planning in the future. But to your point, we're absolutely kind of behind the ball and needing to catch up.
A land that is not protected will be developed. I'm sure.
Questions over here?
Wanted to follow up on John just mentioned, and Harriet has been wonderful. I'm part of the Alliance for Highland Rim Forest, but we've also talked to the state because of the potential to do a Highland Ridge Trail that could cover 6 or 7 counties. But I did want people here to know we're getting ready to publish in Wikipedia the largest urban forest in any city in the world. And that is right here in Nashville. It's 97,000 acres under a continuous forest cover. And that takes the 4 largest are Rio, Mumbai, Portland, and Dallas. Those 4 fit into our Highland Rim Forest with 50% left over. So that's a pretty good way to start. We've got 4 parks, 8,000 acres preserved to start connecting the habitat. I mean, it started back in 2006 with Rapid River. Nashville is just waiting to start playing some of the cards that it's been lucky enough to be dealt. So, it's depressing, a lot of the stuff we hear today, but there is some good news if we act on it. So, thank you. That was an amazing overview of Chattanooga. You probably held a lot back.
We have a question over there in the corner.
Forests are really great, we love them. But there's rocks and landscapes underneath that are really important too. And the question I'd like to say is that we haven't really studied what is holding up our Highland Rim. Why is it that we had 550 landslides in a 3 or 4 day period in 2010? And I'm just curious how the planning department is expanding its study based on what's known about landslides elsewhere and how that can fit in to preserve the Highland Rim and preserve neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I will say that is a part of the scope of the work that our consultants will be doing, is looking at all of the sort of geological, topographical, ecological kind of factors that underpin these things. And I know that we've had prior conversations about the landslides, and that is especially critical when we're facing such intense development as well. And so yes, that will be under the scope of the consultant team that will be working on this. And we're kind of in negotiations right now for that, but I don't have a more definitive answer at this time.
I have a question about the need for the updating of the zoning code to address residential density that will accommodate our growth and allow more affordable and different types of housing. So I know Chattanooga's done that, and I believe Memphis has done that. So I guess, Harriett, what are you, just from your perspective, what are the steps that we have in front of us to get to that point where we're going to start doing it?
Sure. So that's really what the housing and infrastructure study is tasked to lead up to. The study, as one of its deliverables, is to recommend zoning changes that we should be making. And so right now, the administration, the department is looking at, once we get through the housing and infrastructure study and have a set of kind of recommendations of what zoning changes we need to take going on and undertaking a pretty substantial zoning kind of code reform for the county. It will be highly controversial and it will take a lot of resources, and I would assume a good amount of time to get through. But it is kind of one of those things that I think is inevitably on the horizon and is also recognized that it is necessary for us to get where we need to be going in terms of all these other conversations about housing and conservation and transportation and all that.
And could I just do one follow-up? Mike, when you reduced the density requirements in the rural areas in Williamson County, did you also conversely increase density opportunities in the urban zones?
That's a good question, and I didn't really have time to go into that too much. So in our jurisdiction, yes and no. So there are certain key areas that were shown in that coral color where we have increased the allowable density. But our view is that most of that increased density should and will occur within the municipalities. So we have independently, just recently, worked with them to adjust those urban growth boundaries to reflect what they're currently seeing, with the idea being that those are really the landing spots for higher density development in conjunction with their land use policies.
We have time for just one more question, very brief.
Actually, I just have a comment and a suggestion, and that is that I think a lot of the issues that I have heard about in areas with large lots are that people are very much against having higher density housing on those lots, but would be helpful to help people understand that the reason those lots are so big is purely because of the earth. It's because before there were sewer systems, they had to have huge lots for septic systems. And once we have sewers, we don't need that. So there's a historical aspect of this that people need to understand as the need for changes occur.
Great, well, I'd love to give our panelists one more round of applause.